वोसा टीवी में खुश आमदीद। आज के प्रोग्राम में न्यूयॉर्क में मेयर के इंतखाबी उम्मीदवारों के साथ मुसलमानों को दरपेश मसाइल और उनके हल पर मुनक्किद किए गए ऑनलाइन मुकालमे को दिखाएंगे। न्यूयॉर्क की तारीख में ये पहला मुकालमा होगा जिसमें मुसलमानों की मुख्तलिफ नुमाइंदा तंजीमें मेयर के उम्मीदवारों से मुश्तरका मसाइल पर खुलकर बात करेंगी। इस मुकालमे को देखकर आप ये अंदाज़ा लगा सकेंगे कि उम्मीदवारों के पास न्यूयॉर्क का मेयर मुंतखब होने की सूरत में मुसलमानों को दरपेश मसाइल के हल के लिए क्या पॉलिसी है। मारूफ सहाफ़ी आमना नवाज और दीन उबैदुल्ला न्यूयॉर्क म्यूरल कैंडिडेट फोरम की मेज़बानी के फ़राइज़ अंजाम दे रहे हैं। अमरीकन पाकिस्तानी पब्लिक अफेयर्स कमेटी, अमरीकन पाकिस्तानी एडवोकेसी ग्रुप, अपना कम्युनिटी सेंटर, ब्रुकलिन इमर्ज, MCN, MFP और एमगेज के नुमाइंदे मुसलमानों को दरपेश मसाइल पर बात करेंगे।
I'm very excited to be here as well, alongside one of my favorite people in the world, Dean, who will be carrying the comedic load for this evening. Not my strengths, I'm not going to lean into it. Here are the ground rules for the candidates. 90 seconds for introductory remarks at the top of this section. And then for each of our individual questions directed to each of you, you've got about 90 seconds or so to answer that as well. If we as moderators hear a direct line of attack or a line referencing the other candidate, in this case it could get awkward because there are just the two of you, we will then be able to say, hey candidate who was just referenced, would you like 30 seconds or 60 seconds to respond? And I'm sure we'll all keep it civil because you guys have done this before. So those are the ground rules. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to hand it back over to Dean and he's going to kick off the questioning.
Sure, and by the way, in the second hour there are 4 candidates, so Eric and Sean, if you want to take shots at those guys, they're not here to defend themselves. So now we'll do opening statements. Let's start first. We'll do it alphabetically. Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams.
And that's with 90 seconds or 60?
60 to 90. We have only 2 of you, so we have a little extra time.
Okay, because Sean knows I bring a stopwatch with me everywhere. Wow. I am so excited about the opportunity to just engage in this conversation because I am not a new friend. I'm an old friend. And I think the question this community should be asking during this campaign is not so much what are the candidates going to do, but really, where were they? Islamophobia is not new. Where were they when we saw the countless number of young men being snatched away from their parents and put in the correctional facility on 3rd Avenue when I stood out front calling for their release? Or where were they when the police department was infiltrating their mosque and not allowing them to worship in peace? And I called out Raymond Kelly and others to tell them we could never do this to a community. Where were they when countless number of women from your community were being attacked because they wore a hijab, and I stood with them and fought with them to stop it? When Donald Trump called for the Muslim ban, and I had one of the largest demonstrations with some of you who are here now in front of Brooklyn Borough Hall. I am not a new friend, I'm an old friend, and I did not discover you when I was running for mayor. I'm your brother and I know you.
Thank you. And now, Sean Donovan, who served in the Obama administration as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, as well as in the Bloomberg administration. So, Sean?
Dean, thank you for having me and making us feel so welcome. Assalamu alaikum. And Debbie, thank you for all your leadership, everything that you do. I became a public servant because I grew up in a different kind of crisis in this city. I am the grandson and son of immigrants. My grandfather was one of 10 poor Irish kids who grew up on the south side of London, and as a teenager got on a boat alone to West Africa and then to South America to try to make a living on the docks. My dad grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru, and like so many in the Muslim community and our other immigrants around this city, came to New York to find opportunity, and he did. But around me, I also saw a very different New York. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. I saw the South Bronx and so many communities burning to the ground, and it lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of this city that I love. In the 30 years since then, I have led through crisis, whether it's when in the wake of 9/11, rebuilding our city as housing commissioner, as housing secretary in the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit our shores, President Obama asked me to lead the entire federal recovery effort. And then when Ebola and Zika threatened our country, working side by side with Dr. Fauci and all of our leaders across government to make sure it didn't become a pandemic that cost tens of thousands of New Yorkers their lives. I know what it means to lead through crisis, and I am uniquely prepared to be mayor at this moment.
Thank you. So the way we're going to break it down, myself and Amna are going to alternate on the topics. I happen to have the first topic, which is probably the top of everyone's mind, is the economic recovery. We're going through difficult times, and the Muslim community, nearly 50% of the bodegas are owned by Muslim Americans. It's been a struggle. I've written about it for the Daily Beast, talking to Debbie about it, interviewing some bodega owners. A big percentage of our community has taxi cabs, and they have debt. Of course, Muslims are also doctors, lawyers, CEOs, and the whole gambit. It's a struggling time. So, President Adams, I want to start with you. You talk about your plan on your website that we're going to have about 500,000 less jobs when the pandemic is over. Right now, we have over a 12% unemployment rate. We have children going to bed. We have record numbers of people going to food pantries. What would you do on day one to help New Yorkers who are in need right then?
Well, there's several things we need to do on day one. Number one, we need to ensure that the stimulus dollars that are coming to the city, they must go to assist those renters and small property landlords to make sure that we don't balance the budget on the backs of those who are in need. So we need to ensure that we don't have individuals who are renting, losing their homes, but also the greatest level of wealth in Black, Brown, and Muslim communities in their home ownership. So we must balance out to make sure that we receive to the landlords who own property to make sure day one we take care of that. Second, something that's important to your community, public safety. We must get gun violence under control. We have real gang violence in the city with a real saturation of guns in our city. I'm going to reinstitute the anti-crime unit as an anti-gun unit so we can do precision policing, not to harass innocent people, but to go after the real gun violence in the city. Third, we have to give support to our small business owners. And I see it through the procurement process. We spend about $22 billion a year on procurement. There's no reason we can't go to our small shops and stores that really hire 51% of our employees. Let's stop having our buying power used outside our city. Let's use it inside our city and really empower some of our small business.
Thank you. And Sean, you know, you talk about, you just had a plan in January you released, detailed plan, over 500,000 new jobs in various areas, including nightlife and stuff, which, and I still do comedy, I'm very happy about that, bringing it back because we need that very much. Tourism, but again, it's a long-term plan. What would you say to the Muslim business owners who have bodegas and are taxi drivers with a lot of debt, and they're worried about being there in business literally tomorrow? And so when you start on day one, what would you do to help them?
Well, Dean, there is no recovery without restoring our health in this city. We have to end the pandemic, and we have to make sure that every single New Yorker can be vaccinated, and that every single New Yorker knows that they are safe to move around this city. And so no one in this race has the deep relationships with President Biden, Vice President Harris, every leader across the federal government and in Congress. And I would go to work immediately making sure we get the fair share of vaccines that we need, and that we're partnering with the organizations, the trusted messengers in the Muslim community, in every community around this city, so that we're getting vaccines, we're getting the health and protection, and so that we're working to ensure there is the technology in place, contact tracing and testing, so that every time a New Yorker walks in to one of your small businesses, to a restaurant, gets in a taxi, that we know that it is safe, and that will attract New Yorkers and business. It will also attract tourists from across the world back to this city. So those are all key elements. But one of the things I want to focus on something that Eric said. It isn't just enough to get the federal resources. It's knowing how to deliver them directly where they touch the ground. And I want to be clear here. We have over $50 billion in rental assistance and other small business aid that can come to the city. It's based on a design of programs that I created in the wake of the Great Recession, working for President Obama.
And Sean, one quick follow-up. You mentioned as mayor, you'll make sure we get our fair share of vaccines. Are you suggesting that right now we are not getting our fair share of vaccines?
Look, we were the hardest hit place in the world a year ago. Nobody in this country deserves, like New Yorkers do, to ensure that we're getting our fair share. And I don't believe we are at this moment. I believe, as with so many, look, I've spent enough years in Washington, D.C. to know that too often New York City goes without what we deserve. We send $23 billion more to Washington each year than we get back in services. That has to end, and we need a mayor who knows how to stop it.
And if I may be able to respond to that also, no, we're not getting our fair share. We treated this vaccine as it was an English-only speaking vaccine, and we communicated to those who read the New York Times and read the tabloids. We did not respect those who spoke Urdu, those who spoke Arabic, those who spoke Chinese and Korean. We communicated only to English speakers. And others, will have deep relationships to learn about navigating government. But let me tell you my deep relationships. It's the organizations that you represent. My relationship go back over 20 years of being involved with the people who are part of these organizations here.
To that very point, just quickly, when you see the people who are vaccinated in New York as of last week, it's skewed Manhattan and the Upper East Side, where I happen to live, and it shows you how the communication of this skewed to privilege. So last question here, we're doing one from the community for each person. So we have a question from the community. We're going to put it up on the screen, and I'll read it to you from Dr. Purvis Siddiqui. So this is Dr. Purvis Siddiqui's question. It's for Eric Adams. Share what you have seen in terms of economic pain in New York City caused by the pandemic. And as mayor, how would you address these needs?
Thank you. Number one, by using an organization like APNA, a powerful organization that's on the ground. I was with them throughout the pandemic, everything from women's shelters to providing food and support, communicating with on the ground. We made a big mistake by not utilizing those pre-existing organizations and groups during the entire census operation. We called on them to get information out for the census, but we didn't call on them to find out what was happening on the ground. And I told the mayor that we were making a mistake, both the mayor and the governor. So as we talk about using the PPP that's coming from Washington, the stimulus, we need to we can't do what we failed to do when the first round of stimulus came to this city. We went to rich corporations, they all did well. Bankers in this city looked after their friends instead of going on the ground at our small organization. I believe we need to build out our Chamber of Commerce, have them do the backroom work for many of our small organizations, put in place a local business, a banking network, and communicate with the organization and entities on the ground that understand the needs of their communities. We can make sure that we use these stimulus dollars correctly to salvage the economic hit on our community that has been disproportionate to Black, Brown, and other communities in the city.
Thank you. And Amna?
Thank you so much, Dean. All right, gentlemen, we're going to move on now to a new topic, and that is housing and affordable housing and the crisis of housing that we're all experiencing across the country. Sean Donovan, it feels unfair to start with you on this topic because you've got a little bit of experience here, but that's where we'll begin. And it is with a community question that I will begin this round of questions as well. So let's see if we can get that up on the screen. This is coming to us from Tawfiq Haroon from MFP, that is Muslims for Progress. He notes as well, you've got a little bit of experience here. You're unique in the field because, of course, you started off as a housing expert, housing commissioner in New York under Mayor Bloomberg, and later, of course, HUD secretary under President Obama. So as part of your plan, you've called for creating an additional 30,000 affordable housing units a year, plus $2 billion in funds to repair existing public housing units. You've also said the city needs billions in federal funds from Washington to meet the housing needs here. We're talking at a time of incredible crisis, right? It's not just New York City that needs these kinds of funds. So how would you plan on extracting those funds from the federal government?
Well, first, we've got to jump on this because in the last 2 months, Congress has passed almost $50 billion in rental assistance It was designed based on a program I developed called Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing in the wake of the recession. And it can be used flexibly if we know how to use it to keep people in their homes. That is the immediate crisis. We're on the verge of the greatest eviction crisis this city has seen in our lifetimes. And if we don't get that money out quickly, continue to have the eviction moratorium that I advocated for and worked with Congress to extend, we're going to have a crisis like we've never seen on our hands. So that's job one, is putting that money that we already have, that I know how to put to work, out to keep people in their homes. Second, we have to recognize that this is a moment where we have an opportunity to finally get the federal dollars we need to create more affordable housing.
Eric Adams, let me bring you in here, and I'd love for you to just sort of respond to what you just heard, because I think one of the things a lot of voters out there are struggling with is figuring out where the differences are between the two candidates. So what about just what you've just heard and what you know of Sean Donovan's plan do you disagree with? What would you do differently?
First of all, I'm an expert on housing in this way. I was almost homeless as a child. I think sometimes we fail to understand what experts are. Experts are not only those who live inside the office spaces, but who have lived the tragedies that people are experiencing every day. And I think Sean's plan is an amazing plan, but I will go further. Number one, we need to look at what we have right now. We have SRO laws that are outdated. We need to change that. We need to lean into the direction of micro units to build smaller, change our zonings, to make sure that we can have affordable sites for people right now. We need to look at the large number of hotels in the outer boroughs that we can retrofit right now. It's cheaper to retrofit those hotels instead of building a new infrastructure right away. I say let's upzone in affluent communities, good transportation, great schools, great access to healthy food, and bring poorer people into those communities. We can do that right now. So there's some great long-term plans, but there are things we can do right now to deal with this real high housing crisis. Let's keep people in their housing right now by giving them greater subsidies.
Thank you both for that. I hate to move on, but we do want to cover as many topics as we can. So I want to switch now to another big topic on everyone's minds, which is that of discrimination, specifically Islamophobia, and of course this surge in anti-Asian hate that we've seen more recently and over the last year. So Sean Donovan, I'll begin with you. We saw where that trend and where the year of accumulating anti-Asian sentiment has led earlier this week in those horrific shootings in Atlanta. We see how easily communities of color can be dehumanized and targeted, and the Muslim community knows that well, particularly in the last 20 years since 9/11. You've talked about accountability. There's been a lot of focus on accountability to investigate, to prosecute hate crimes, but what is your plan to actually decrease those hate crimes and incidents from happening in the first place?
Well, first I want to say thank you for raising this issue, and I particularly want to thank Debbie for opening this forum by recognizing the hateful violence that we saw in Atlanta. And look, I do think it's critical that we have real enforcement, that we hold people accountable. And I will say, as someone who 30 years ago met John Lewis, inspired by him, became friends with him and worked closely with him, one of the central reasons I went into housing is understanding that we separate people primarily through housing in neighborhoods. And we must have not just an enforcement strategy to stop the violence, but also to get to the underlying causes of inequity and what separates and victimizes people in our society. And so as the housing secretary, I was a leader on civil rights and fair housing. I took the lead not just on enforcement, but what's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. The steps that we need to take to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed and to get ahead. Those are all critical. And we also need to have a mayor who will build bridges across communities. And I'm sure Eric will speak about it. I want to call out the great work he's done through the programs he's created to build connections across communities in Brooklyn, Breaking Bread and other efforts, that we must build those bridges.
So I hear you mentioning education, if I can just follow up briefly, as something that can counter some of these things. But on the issue of breaking bread, I mean, one of the things we should point out is that a lot of these hate incidents and crimes are being carried out by people with white supremacist backgrounds. And I'm sure you're not saying we should be sitting down and breaking bread with them. But I guess the question is more to the point of how would you plan on countering that? We've just had a national security assessment from the intelligence community saying this is now the most lethal threat in America, is domestic violent extremism, people motivated by race and ethnicity. So how would you protect Muslim New Yorkers who are vulnerable to those?
So obviously this goes to enforcement, right? And it goes to partnering with law enforcement early on and making sure that we are creating true accountability. And again, one of the things that is unique about me in this race is the deep relationships I have with the Attorney General, with the incoming Homeland Security Secretary, Ali Mayorkas, who is a close friend and colleague, the ability to work collaboratively with our national law enforcement agencies, who often have the best intelligence on these issues, and to be able to make sure that that enforcement is targeted, and again, balanced with making sure that we're building communities and building respect across, because we have seen that law enforcement can target in ways that also create the very problems that we're trying to eliminate.
Thank you for that, Sean. Eric Adams, if I can turn to you now. We heard Sean Donovan mention education as a core component of decreasing the bigotry, of teaching people their true history here in the States. There is this religious literacy curriculum that the National Social Studies Association has incorporated, and a number of other public school systems have implemented it. You mentioned on the questionnaire in advance of this forum that you don't support implementing that into New York public city schools. And I wonder if you could just explain why, and also answer some of these similar issues. Is in this growing tide of Islamophobia, anti-Asian American sentiment, how would you combat that?
Well, I think what you pointed out was extremely important, and what Sean stated about the foundation and underlying reasons. Number one, any major problem must be approached on three levels: short-term, mid-term, long-term. Short term, we need to hold our social media giants accountable. We should not be allowing this hate on our social media platforms. We need to be clear about that. We need to have thorough investigations from the police department. Second, long term, it's about educating our children. That is what Breaking Bread, Building Bond is about. No, we're not going to stop that hate group from turning around, but we can stop feeding our babies with hatred and afraid of each other. 100 meals throughout the city, 10 people at each meal, all from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, sitting down and talking to each other. We don't talk to each other as Americans.
Thank you for that. Dean, turn it over to you now.
You're on mute, Steve, and we know it's hard to mute you. Dean.
Dean, you're still muted, bud.
Dean, you're muted.
I wish I had that power to mute him whenever I wanted. They won't give it to
I was
me.
muting to be so, but I'm saying you guys get along so well. It's kind of disappointing. We were really hoping for the fighting. So,
Dean, you were funny even while muted. That's an impressive talent.
Now, Sean, if I had a vote right now, it's going to be tough, Eric. So, Sean, so let's talk about an issue we saw in our streets of New York City and around the country last summer, and that was people rallying in favor of making our criminal justice system actually one that's just and not a criminal injustice system. And I want to start, we have a community question actually for Eric Adams. So can we put that up, and we'll start with that one first? And this is from Sarah Pervez, the American Pakistani Advocacy Group. And Mr. Eric said, you served as a police officer for 22 years, rising to the rank of captain NYPD. You served in the state Senate for 2 terms. Now you've been your second term as Brooklyn Borough President. What can you point to in terms of tangible changes you've made in policing and policing culture that ensure that the rights of all New Yorkers are protected equally?
Thank you for that. And it fascinates me sometimes when people say, wait a minute, this guy's a police officer. We can never elect a police officer. People don't really know my history. I was arrested as a child, 15 years old, beat bad by police officers. Civil rights activists came to me and asked me to join the police department to fight from within. I did not want to be a cop, but I knew we needed public safety and justice. And so I joined the police department, fought against stop and frisk, was a leading voice in the country about police reform. It didn't start when the Black Lives Matter marches took place. I was already engaged in this for 22 years while I was in the belly of the beast. And I used to have Muslim representatives and leaders call me when the police department was biased against them. They were happy to have someone inside that agency that fought for them. First, I testified in federal court to stop the stop and frisk, NYPD versus Floyd versus NYPD. The judge mentioned my name in her ruling when she ruled against the police department. Second, they were stopping and frisking young innocent people in the city, keeping a database of Muslim young men and women. I was able to get that database destroyed by passing legislation with now Congressperson Hakeem Jeffries. I stopped the quota system. I was able to stop the surveillance of Muslims as they worship inside mosques. I was known to fight against the anti-Islamophobia senator his name is Greg Ball. You know, my advocacy around this issue is over 30 years. I did not just start this, I've been consistent.
And Sean, you worked with President Obama, but before that you worked with Mayor Bloomberg, Commissioner of Housing, 2004 to 2009. As you know, Mayor Bloomberg engaged in widespread surveillance of the Muslim community. We learned about it later, of course, from spying on where we prayed, to where we worked, to where we had fun. While you were in the administration, did you ever hear about that was going on? And if so, did you ever go to Mayor Bloomberg to discuss it?
So, Dean, I left to go work for President Obama at the end of 2008. It was just at that time that the lawsuit that Eric was talking about began to work its way through the courts. And I was not, as you said, I was housing commissioner. I was not involved in policing. Obviously, what happened was shameful. Mayor Bloomberg himself has said it was a mistake, many of the policies that were pursued. And I agreed with that then. I agree with that now. But I'll tell you what I did do as housing commissioner. And after that, I began a landmark program where we gave our housing vouchers to folks coming out of Rikers. That was the time when the reentry policy under Mayor Giuliani before us was to drop people off from Rikers in the middle of the night on a street corner in Long Island City with a token. I haven't just talked about it, but I've actually made real change that made a difference in people's lives.
Thank you. If I'm permitted to, I just want to lean into this a little more, because many people are not aware of what was happening in the city under the former commissioner. And I was attacked. Many of the editorial boards, when I talked about it was wrong to go into the mosque and to do surveillance on innocent people, I was demonized and I was attacked. And when I talked about what was happening to the community after 9/11, many of the young people who are now advocates now don't really know what happened in this city after 9/11 and how we decimated innocent communities where Muslims live. I remember being in the basement on Coney Island Avenue with mothers who were in tears because their sons disappeared in the middle of the night and were put inside correctional facilities. We did to Muslims in this country what we did to innocent Japanese citizens during the war. It has never been completely told what has happened to the Muslims of this country, and I was there and I went through it with you, and we will never allow that to happen again.
Thank you, Eric. Amna?
Thank you, Dean. Gentlemen, I've got one question for each of you related to education, specifically to the provision of halal meals in New York City public school system. It's of interest to the community, and so I want to make sure we get that answer to them. Listen, about 10% of New York City public school population is Muslim, right? Every kid who goes to a New York City public school gets both Eid holidays off. That's how many Muslim kids are in New York City public schools. And the city has for years now passed legislation to provide kosher meals and halal meals to those students. That's a program already in place in neighboring New Jersey, in Michigan, in California. It's not yet all the way implemented in New York City public schools. So A, do you support the provision of halal meals to every kid who wants one in New York City public schools? And if so, what is your plan to make it happen? Eric Adams, we'll start with you.
Everyone knows me. They call me the food guy. Think about this. I cook for my family. I cooked them a meal. They ate it. They loved it. And then when they finished eating it, they finished consuming it. I said that was a vegan meal, and they said, "What? I didn't. What? Halal milk?
Are you vegan? Can we clarify? You are vegan?
Yes, I am.
Good for you.
Halal milk is good food. So if we have a community where overwhelmingly the number of children there are Muslims, and why can't we have all the food served there halal meals? We're making this a little bit more complicated than it is. The food in that school could be halal. It's not bad food for the children who are not Muslim. It's still good food, and it's healthy food, but we should go further. Allow our children to have a room in the school to do everything from meditation to the call of prayer. Let's treat education differently and embrace our diversity and lean into an asset-based education where we can learn from each other, but yes to halal meals, and we can make it happen.
Thank you for that. Sean Donovan, same question to you.
Absolutely, yes. I'm not a vegan, but I absolutely agree with Eric on this question that we have to focus on delivering on this. And one of the things, if you look at my career, I obviously am a numbers guy. I oversaw the $4 trillion federal budget. And again, I've created real accountability through the HUD-STAT program that I created that dramatically reduced homelessness around the country and created real accountability. What I would do in one of my first acts as mayor is to create a chief equity officer position reporting directly to me with authority over every agency who would have the responsibility to ensure that we're tracking issues like this that really go to the fundamental root of, is every New Yorker able to get the services that are culturally appropriate and that really allow them to live lives of opportunity. And I want to say, it's not just in our schools. When a year ago, when I saw the COVID crisis coming on, I knew we were going to have 4-hour lines at soup kitchens because I've worked on crisis after crisis around the country. And we could today, working with the Biden administration, with the right leadership in City Hall, get hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into our restaurants, put people back to work. Dean, you asked earlier about how do we jumpstart our economic recovery? There's an idea, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into our restaurants, including Muslim-owned restaurants in the hardest hit neighborhoods, serving emergency, hot, fresh, halal meals.
So I think you may have just lost the vegan vote, but I hear you both saying that you are committing to finding funding to make the halal food available for students, and that is our takeaway. I thank you for your answers, and Dean, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you.
I was never going to win the vegan vote, just saying. I think Eric's got that locked up. Unless
there's vegan lamb, not happening. So, the last question. This is a short one, quick one. This is more about freedom of expression. I know it sounds like a foreign policy issue, but it truly isn't. It's about boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is a nonviolent movement about calling attention to the policies of the Netanyahu administration. In certain places like Texas, literally, if you don't certify that you won't be a part of this, you can't get a job in Texas. You can't even get a contract in Texas. As mayor, would you penalize people who want to be involved in BDS or any other kind of boycott movement? Start with you, Eric.
No, I won't. I think it's important that, this country, we lift up the right to protest. We lift up the right to call on our methods of voicing ourselves. Any way we do that, that is not harmful, that is non-violent, I think we should have a right to do so. I am criticized when I went to Turkey to visit those who were on a refugee camp on the border of Syria because my Turkish residents asked me to go there to see that. I believe we have to be in a continuous place of communication and conversation, and we cannot in any way stymie the right to protest the right. This is what this country is about.
Sean, same question.
I mentioned a few moments ago that 30 years ago, I met John Lewis, and I was fundamentally inspired to get involved in housing and neighborhoods and issues of segregation. And where did that movement originate? In the fundamental right of all Americans to raise their voices, just as we saw last summer in our streets, as the Black Lives Movement emerged as a force and was celebrated by John Lewis. So absolutely people need to be free to raise their voices. But absolutely I am for the ability to raise your voice in protest.
Thank you. Amna, I want to thank you both. Amna, do you have some closing remarks you want to make?
I don't really. I think voters are probably more interested in hearing from these two gentlemen than me, but I just want to add my thanks to both of you for being here today, for taking the questions. Eric Adams, we'd love to know your vegan recipes, and you can share them with us online perhaps. But yeah, I think that wraps up our questions for both of you. I think at this point, we turn it over to Anika, if she is there and ready to join us. Anika Nawabi is joining us from MCN, and I believe will be delivering some remarks right now.
Yes, thank you and good evening, everyone. My name is Anika Nawabi. I'm the Executive Director at the Muslim Community Network. Eric, it's great to see you again. We just had a town hall with you last week.
Yes.
I just want to again thank you, Amna and Dean, for a wonderful moderation. This was very informative. We talked about issues that range from both, important issues that are important to the Muslim community, like halal food, religious diversity, education, BDS. Also want to thank our community organizations, Apna Brooklyn Community Center, APHAG, as well as Muslims for Progress. Collectively, we serve tens and thousands of Muslim New Yorkers, as well as non-Muslims. We've been running food pantries over the course of the last year, and the amount of people who have come and taken up our services are great, and they're very diverse. So we are happy to bring your message, Sean and Eric, to our communities and see where your priorities and such lie. I just want to make a quick announcement in the sense that we will be having another candidate forum comprising of all the Republican and independent candidates in a couple of weeks. So please stay tuned for that announcement and date. Right now, we're going to be transitioning off to our next part of the candidate forum, which includes candidates Andrew Yang, Scott Stringer, Catherine Garcia, and Ray McGuire.
Hello, everyone. I am back. So I want to thank all of you who've tuned in and who are going to continue tuning in. As Anika just mentioned, we are now up for session 2. Again, I want to do an introduction for those who are just coming in for session 2. My name is Dr. Debbie Almantasser. I am the Senior Advisor at Engage New York. On behalf of the 10 organizations based in New York City, I'd like to welcome you to our first of 2 candidate forums. Engage Metro New York is proud to have partnered with the following organizations that are comprised of 501c3s, as well as C4 groups, the Pakistani American Public Affairs Committee, American Pakistani Advocacy Group, APNA Brooklyn Community Center, Brooklyn Emerge, MUPPIES, the Shia Council, the Shia Muslim Council of New York, the Muslim Community Network, Muslims for Progress, and the Yemeni American Merchants Association. So I will turn it now to our moderators who will introduce the candidates and do their thing. So take it away, Amna and Dean. Thank you so much.
We'll wait 1 minute, and as soon as all the candidates are here, because it's actually before 8 o'clock. I didn't even realize this. It's actually pre-8 o'clock right now. So
Can't be on time, be early.
Yes, and thank you for being early. So
I thought I went over time, so forgive me that I didn't give you guys a great introduction, Amna and Dean.
If you don't mind, take a minute or two, say what you'd like to say, introduce yourself to any folks watching out there, and Andrew Yang, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Amna. It's so great to be here with everyone. Our city is in the midst of a devastating crisis, and the question is, how will we get out of it? Will we get out of it? I'm a numbers guy, as some of you may know. We are down 600,000 jobs, thousands of small businesses, and we know that the Muslim community is extraordinarily entrepreneurial and enterprising and are the owners and operators of many of these small businesses. We're down 60 million tourists, 82% of commuters, 70% of subway ridership. Violence is rising. in our city, anti-Asian violence, and there's been a tough week on that front, is up 900% documented. These aren't political problems so much as they are wounds that have been wrought by the coronavirus. And the question is, who is going to be able to speed up our recovery and activate the resources, not just in city government, so that it frankly gets out of the way to a higher degree, but also the philanthropic sector, the corporate sector, even the technology sector, in order for us to have the tools for us to have New York City recover in the way we want it to. I believe that I can speed up our recovery faster than anyone else in the field. I have the relationships in DC and the know-how, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector, to get our city back the way that we remember it.
Thank you for that. Ray McGuire, thank you so much for being here. I'll turn it over now to you for introductory remarks.
Thank you so much for having me. I would like to just observe that I've had a long-standing relationship with the community. I come from a community not dissimilar. I grew up in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio, raised by my single mother, who, along with my grandparents, raised me and my two brothers, and we had half a dozen foster children in our home at any one point in time. I didn't know my dad, and based on my mother's sacrifices, I came east to get an education. I was able to do that by going to Harvard College, then law school and business school. And I came to this city and I had a lot of debt. I had a great education. I had no money. And New York City has been great to me. It's a city that I love, but today it is facing a crisis of COVID, a crisis of the economy, a crisis of racial and religious hatred, and a crisis of the climate. The disproportionate impact of all of these, which existed before COVID, has been on this community. And I have the lived experiences. I have the experiences in business. So thanks for having me, and thanks for my long-standing relationships with the community.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for those remarks. Scott Stringer, welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's great to be with Engage. And just want to say hi to Dr. Debbie and so many others who are on tonight. Look, this city is facing three crises at the same time. We have an economic crisis, a public health crisis, and a social justice crisis. And we cannot reopen the city the same way we closed it. And I'm running for mayor because I have the vision, the skills, and the actionable plans to take on the inequities that we have seen as this pandemic has laid bare. We've got to take our city forward. And I believe that experience is going to matter at this time in the mayor's office. I've been a state assemblyman. I've worked in Albany. I know we have to reset that relationship. I served as borough president, went to community-based planning to get the big projects done, working with communities. And as controller, I've been the chief financial officer of the city. I've managed a $240 billion pension fund, the fourth largest in America, 14th largest in the world. Not only did we protect the retirement security, 100,000 city workers, I have been on the front lines with all of you to advance justice in our city. Relationship, working on issues. I'm not new to the community, and I'm certainly not new to people on this call tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you to all of you for being here. To our audience, a couple of quick notes. If you were expecting Catherine Garcia to join us, she will be joining us just a little bit later, so she'll join us in progress. Dean and I are going to be kind of ping-ponging back and forth across a few different topics. I'm going to hand it over to him to kick us off with the questions.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for being here tonight so that the Muslim community can meet you and then you can make some new Muslim friends. Because we never have too many Muslim friends. It's sort of my mantra. We're going to talk about the economy now for the next couple of questions. I want to start with a community question. It's for Controller Scott Stringer. So let's put that up on the screen. It's by Syed Ali Hassan from the Shia Muslim Council of New York. He writes, Scott, you have pledged to bring our economy back with a focus on supporting small businesses, putting New Yorkers back to work and training them for jobs of tomorrow. But how do you ensure that communities of color will get a fair shot at these opportunities?
Well, that's an important question. And, under my small business plan, it is geared to making sure that we help a lot of our immigrant businesses. Because let's face it, Wall Street made a bundle during the pandemic. The Trump stimulus package benefited the richest people in the city and this country, and $38 billion in profits were made. How that happened is just unbelievable. But here's what also happened. We lost 2,800 small businesses that employ 50 people or less. Many of our local retail spaces owned by immigrant communities, including the Muslim community, is literally hanging by a thread. So here's a couple of quick things. One, we must ensure that we give tax breaks to the businesses that are hanging on. We're also going to have to incentivize new businesses to come into what are now vacant commercial corridors in so much of our city. I have a chief's diversity officer in my office. We need to do that in every city agency. So there's a lot that I want to do to empower the communities that have been left out of the pandemic financial surge, so to speak.
Thank you, Scott. Ray, you have a remarkable career and a truly remarkable life as you went through here. Remarkable career on Wall Street. But what do you say to the 50% of bodegas owned by Muslim Americans who are barely making ends meet? Some of them have closed. To the taxi drivers, where they are brought down by debt. Yes, there are Muslims who are lawyers and doctors and CEOs, but the ones who have struggled the most are those on the front lines doing those careers. How can you tell them you can relate to their experience, being that you've been on Wall Street, successfully, of course, but for all these decades?
That this community, when it comes to MWBEs, which is part of my plan of Go Big, Go Small, is included. And also I take a look at the people who've described what they've done in while they've been in government in the de minimis amount. I'm being generous, the de minimis amount of procurement contracts that this community has received under this administration, or quite candidly, under most administrations, which will change under my administration based on my track record. I got receipts.
Thank you, Ray. Andrew, of course, you're known for universal basic income, that the government took your plan and have done it. Now for New York, you're proposing, they really did. It was all you. You were trending on Twitter when they first talked about stimulus plans, as you probably recall.
You helped make it happen, Dean. You had me on before it was cool, so I appreciate it.
I was very intrigued by UBI. Now for New York, you're proposing, last I've seen, about 500,000 New Yorkers would get universal basic income. That's about 8% of New Yorkers. From what I'm seeing, about 32% of adults reported going to food pantries. Of New Yorkers. That's a huge increase. That's a 200% increase. What are you going to do for the rest of New Yorkers on day one who don't qualify for UBI, but their kids are going to bed hungry? They're worried about being evicted tomorrow. They're losing their job, foreclosed on their medallion or their bodega. What would you do for the others who don't qualify for that but still need help?
I want to be the anti-poverty mayor, and I think most people know that if I had my druthers, we'd all be getting $1,000 a month plus. But here in New York City, we do have to be strategic about how we can improve people's lives. So as you suggested, I've committed $1 billion to alleviate extreme poverty among the 500,000 poorest New Yorkers. And we're going to get a lot of that money back because we're spending over $2 billion on homelessness services right now. And if you keep people in more secure, stable situations, it's actually a fantastic use of resources. But you're right, that's not going to touch a lot of the need. I want to expand financial services. We're going to have a people's bank that I've committed $100 million to that's going to augment the resources that are available to community development financial institutions.
Catherine Garcia, welcome to you. You're joining a conversation in progress as we're putting to each of the candidates questions about how they would address discrimination and prevent hate crimes from happening before they do. And you've joined just in time to take a community question. So you'll see it come up on the screen right now. Members of our community have been submitting their own questions about this issue. This one comes to us from Aisha UQ from the American Pakistani Public Affairs Committee. She says, you've mentioned the importance of expanding Muslim, Sikh, Jewish visibility in our educational system, but you have opposed mandating in New York City schools the same religious literacy curriculum from the National Social Studies Association. It's already been adopted by other public school systems. So when it comes to the educational aspect of this, what is your plan to implement that, if not this curriculum? Catherine Garcia, over to you.
I don't think that I've opposed anything as of yet. I do believe that we need to have culturally competent curriculums in our schools that recognize all of our history and that celebrate all of our history. Like, one of the things that's happening now with Asian American hate crimes is this concept that Asian Americans are new. They're not new. They've been here since the beginning of this country, and they have been part of what makes New York City great and what makes America great, but we don't talk about it. The same thing is true of people of Jewish faith and people of Muslim faith, that they are invisible in our curriculums.
Thank you for your time. I think we now turn it over to, I'm hoping someone pops up on the screen soon.
Is Najee?
It is Najee, I believe, yes.
To say goodnight.
Assalamu alaikum,
There he is.
everybody. There you go. I want to thank, Dean and Amna. You guys did an amazing job. I mean, really, you guys just forget it. We were all smiles all day long. Very professional. And I want to thank Engage for putting everything together. It's been a wonderful forum. I want to thank all the candidates that came. I want to thank them, really for their answers, for their efforts. And you know what? May the best person win. Thank you very much. And good night,
Thank
everybody.
you. Good night.
Salam, good night.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
जी नाज़रीन, आप देख रहे थे अमेरिकन मुसलमानों की एसोसिएशंस और तंजीमों के नुमाइंदों और मेयर के उम्मीदवारों के माबैन अपनी नौइयत का मुनफरिद मुकालमा। आइंदा प्रोग्राम में किसी और तकरीब का अहवाल आपको बताएंगे। देखते रहिए वोसा टीवी।